in the United States, thanks to the Nunn-Lugar program, a natural partner for that. But we visited the site with Elwood Gift from the Y-12 in Oak Ridge Laboratory, and we saw and took samples and analyzed on site and took some samples back to the United States. 600 kilograms of highly enriched uranium at this factory in Ust-Kamenogorsk, Kazakhstan, in assorted stainless steel buckets, in pipes, and it was almost banal that there were just these chunks of metal spaced apart so they wouldn't reach a critical mass. But when we returned to Almaty, and Bill Courtney, who was also a bold and fearless leader, and Jackson McDonald, we reported back to Washington that indeed there were about 600 kilograms of 90% enriched U-235. Some of it, about 126 kilograms in pure uranium metal form, directly usable. And he said, and this was true, he said it was protected by a good padlock. And I remember it well. It was, you see them in
Home Depot?
In antique stores. With the big key, and indeed, and there was a female guard with a 9mm Makarov. Apparently they were more reliable than the male guards because they didn't drink as much. But that, and Jeff will attest to this, that certainly got Washington's attention. It wasn't just conjecture, it wasn't just the factory director who was sharing this information for whatever reason. It was real, and that mobilized Washington and the technical expertise, and it took time, but by that fall, right before winter really hit hard, and I remember that evening like it was yesterday, driving in the lead car of a secure convoy from the Ust-Kamenogorsk factory out to the airfield where the C-5s, the first C-5 was going to land to load up and transport for that long flight back to the United States, the highly enriched uranium. And we were sliding on black ice. And we had these big trucks loaded up with pallets and barrels of HEU sliding around. And I just couldn't imagine having to report to Washington that one of them had slid off a bridge right into the Irtysh River. But thankfully, in that part of the world, people know how to drive even on black ice, and we made it to the airfield and sent that HEU on its way to Tennessee. But it was an incredible experience, and what I didn't know at the time was that this was a big boost to the Nunn-Lugar program. There were a lot of skeptics, and it really set a good precedent. And Laura will talk more about this, but for the whole concept of removal and elimination, not just in place, but in this case, removing it from the country, and we had some follow-on operations that were based on that similar model, and indeed, right through the nuclear security summits. Just recently, some HEU was removed from Kharkiv, Ukraine. But it was definitely the best years of my life. I loved living in Kazakhstan. It was a beautiful country, as Jackson McDonald remembers. We played hard and we worked hard. Hiking, the mountains were heavenly, like the Tian Shan, the heavenly mountains. Hunting, and the hunting trip that Vitaly Mete, the factory director, invited me on was just an incredible moment in my life, and I suppose 20 years later we can say the rest is history.
It's not quite history yet, right? And I was just thinking as you were remarking on the removal as a strategy that, and we should circle back to this, the little matter of, say, Syrian chemical weapons, because talk about the parallels to today and the challenges of today. But I'll ask you about that. But let's turn to Laura and just maybe segue us from the time of Sapphire to today's challenges? Laura Holgate.
Well, I have to say, the Project Sapphire was one of the most exciting and meaningful projects I'd ever been associated with, even though I wasn't on the ground, watching the sparks fly as the testing went on although I heard about it. But having been in on the ground floor of the Nunn-Lugar program, I can tell you that even, in '94, the Nunn-Lugar program was still fresh. When we were sitting up at Harvard kind of envisioning what the context of a Nunn-Lugar program might be, certainly removing 25 bombs worth of HEU from Kazakhstan was not really what we had thought of. But thanks to the vision of two gentlemen who have given me a life's work, if I can put it that way, that to create a flexibility and a capacity and the tools to do this kind of job when the time came and when it became very clear that that was the answer. That was really exciting. And I remember sitting in the very back as a very baby special assistant to Assistant Secretary Carter at the time. And I remember the press conference at the Pentagon with Secretary of Defense Bill Perry and Secretary of Energy Hazel O'Leary. And they were just so proud, the two of them, and I was sitting in the sidelines being very proud with them to bring word of this major success to the world. And that it had been kept secret. I mean, honestly, who can remember, sorry, Tom, that we could keep a secret in those days.
There's still some secrets, Laura. We're working on that, though.
And thank God we did, because Lord knows what would have happened if someone had gotten there before that famous night on the black ice.
That's right.
And I still remember, this is a technology timestamp, I remember taping it. Remember videotapes? I remember taping that press conference for my family because it was right before Thanksgiving. And I was going home to see my family. And I was going to you'd say, this is why I'm in Washington, Mom and Dad. This is what I came to do. And to be even just a fly on the wall, which is really all I was at that time, it was just so exciting. And even then, you could see how important it was. And I remember Secretary Perry, I mean, Andrew, you mentioned it earlier, at the press conference, he called this defense by other means in a big way. I mean, this was not what we even thought of. And added, we'd put this bomb-grade nuclear material forever out of the reach of potential black marketeers, terrorists, or a new nuclear regime. And I just want to remind us, 25 bombs worth, however you want to count it, 600 kilograms, 1,300 pounds, that is a lot of nuclear material. And think how different the world would be if that had gone missing somehow into the gray zones of ungoverned areas, into the black market of nuclear materials, into the hands of terrorists, into a major world capital. And when you're thinking about 25 bombs, I mean, that's not just the one bomb that goes off and then everybody figures it out. I mean, that gives a terrorist capability to say, okay, there were one city, I've now got 24 more. Which one do you want next? And you're going to do what I ask. And that, the thought of that quality, that volume of material being out of control is just really something we have to take quite seriously as a measure of the success. But looking to what came after, I mean, there were so many lessons embedded in Project Sapphire. Really, and Andy hinted at the very first one that I really am so taken by is the impact of technical experts working together. The very talented team from Y-12 and Oak Ridge National Lab, they're, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, glove box to glove box with their Kazakhstani counterparts to package this material, to make it safe to transport. That paved the way for dozens and dozens and dozens of expert level interactions over the next the 20 years that followed, and hopefully the 20 years that follow from where we are now. I mean, there's so much that can get done when the technical experts get together, do their thing, make the world safer, and that's really one of to me the most meaningful human level lessons of Project Sapphire. The other thing I will say, and many of you know, I've been involved in a lot of transportation of nuclear materials. It all comes down to the containers. And I remember there were some pretty hairy container issues associated with this. You couldn't ship them in the long tubes, so you had to put them in.
Your reach back gets a little bit more difficult. Maintainability, the ease of maintenance, ease of repair, so that we can keep that resilience, that sustainability going. And then put the people piece in there for the manning and the training piece. The type of sailor, is it a career sailor or is it a first-term sailor? Yeah, we heard over the course of the day, that's a huge, huge cost. And so you need to figure that out as part of the equation and understand art of the possible. Can you spend more money up front on ship design that lowers the amount of training that a sailor would have to be able to operate that gear? That's important. And so think about that. Make sure we get the people piece in there, but it's length of training, unique training, those kind of things. A couple other considerations, and then I'll pause, and hopefully this will generate some questions, is I think we ought to take a look at the ability to split the hull form from the package, the combat systems that goes on it. And if you do that, does that open up opportunity in the future? So maybe you build the hull with a little bit of excess, use commercial practices, many of the things that Ron talked about that I think are very valuable, with an understanding that over the life of a given ship, we generally end up completely replacing combat systems, doing HM&E upgrades, those kind of things. So can you do it so it makes more sense? Modularity speaks to a lot of that. And perhaps we ought to take a look, as another excursion to that, is what should the expected service life of a ship be? So should it be 40 years, 30 years, or 15 years? Maybe it's easier or makes more sense to build a short duration ship and replace that, perhaps for some of the smaller craft, than it does to build that hull and try to get 30, 35, 40, 45 years out of it. Again, I'd ask you to take a look at all those things. That's the kind of discussion that we need to have between those in uniform, between industry, and I think our policymakers as we go forward. And if we do that, I think we can drive our costs, not only in procurement, but the operational budget that we have through the life of the ship down significantly and make all this much more affordable. Thank you.
Admiral Hunt, thank you very much. Admiral Lewis.
Normally when I'm having a ship affordability discussion, the opening scene of the movie Grumpy Old Men comes to mind. I got Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau up on the announcer's booth in a AAA baseball stadium. You hear the crack of the bat. Jack Lemmon goes, and the crowd roars. And Walter Matthau says, crowd? What crowd? We could all leave in the same car. So I thank you all for coming here and showing this much interest. I actually don't know that I've ever seen this many people talk about ship affordability. Thank you. You gave 3/4 of what I wanted to say, so I'll just cut to the chase. First, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing today, and I'll focus on the successes that we've had to do all the things that Ron talked about. And then I want to expand on what Admiral Hunt said about some possible future options in terms of changing ship designs in order to enhance affordability. First thing I look at is what are measures of poor affordability. The first one I see is force structure. If budgets are flat and force structure is going down, we have an affordability problem. In the last 10 years, Navy's ship force structure has gone down 10% in a fairly flat shipbuilding environment. And op tempo is up 15%. So there's clearly high demand for the ships, but we're losing ships. That tells me we have an affordability problem. Second thing I look at, more industry specific, is shipbuilding inflation rates compared to OSD and commercial inflation rates. Some folks might want to say, well, ships have gotten more complicated and that stuff, and that's why I compare it to OSD inflation rates, because jet fighters and tanks and missiles and satellites have also gotten more complicated IT systems. So that in my mind, tends to neutralize the military effects and looks more strictly at the cost. And for the last several years, shipbuilding inflation, Navy shipbuilding inflation, has been running double OSD inflation. Now, what does that mean? Last year, shipbuilding inflation was running about 2.2% a year. What that means is ship prices double every 20 years. So our $2 billion ship this year is a $4 billion ship in 20 years, an $8 billion ship in 40 years. So maybe we can afford the $2 billion ship, but at what point can we no longer afford to buy the ships? And if you look back in history, a lot of navies had this problem and they couldn't figure it out, and they stopped being navies. Last thing mentioned earlier was contract overruns. That's an indicator. They're not always bad, but a high degree of contract overruns indicates that there's an issue in the risk management processes. So what have we done? First thing I think most important is we've stabilized our budgets. We've been transparent in our programs. We've told everybody what we're going to do, and then we've done it. This last year, the Navy awarded contracts and options for 36 ships. I think that's unprecedented, worth an aggregate $18 billion. Now, some of those options aren't going to be exercised for a couple of years, a few years into the fit-up, but the point is we basically cleared the roster of all backlog ship orders this year. I only have one ship within my PO that was budgeted before fiscal year 12 that we haven't awarded yet. In the next year, we've got about 12 more ships to go. So we had a big slug of ships. 20 of those were the LCSs. Several other ships. All the Sunwalt ships are under contract now. So this gives the shipbuilding community a high degree of certainty of what the work is that the Navy's got. They've got it under contract, or they know those options are coming. And I think that's important from the industry perspective, allows them to plan and schedule, do their workforce, and do other things. Last thing is transparent long-term plans. We publish a 30-year plan. We publish a 10-year plan.